Alright, so we are going to start our nCloth setup. So first things first, we go to our set project, and we don't have a project yet. You remember we had that bullet one? Okay, so we can't set it to bullet. We could, but we want to keep things organized. So I'm going to go to File, Project, Window, and make a new project. And this one's going to be called nCloth Sarcona. Same folder, 2550 work, except there we go. Now, nCloth is, I think, one of the cool things inside Maya. Just to give you a quick example of what nCloth is, I'm going to create a plane, just like we did in the previous one. I'm going to turn the grid off by clicking that guy right there. And then I'm going to create a sphere. I'm going to give ourselves a bit more frames, obviously. 500 is usually a good number to go with. And under nCloth, here's all the, I'll switch to the menu so we can stop having to do that. nDynamics. Here's nMesh is our main menu that we're going to be focusing on. So there's create passive collider, create nCloth, and then a couple other things. Okay. Same thing as always texture your stuff before you go into it. Okay. You always want to make sure you texture it. You will probably lose the texture when you make it an nCloth, but then you can just reassign it. Okay. But any UV layout or whatever else you're going to have to do, it has to be done beforehand. Alright, so the ground is my passive collider, just like in Bullet. Okay, so I click it. There's no options I need to set, except for it'll go to the nucleus. Okay. For the sphere, create nCloth, and there's no options except for which nucleus solver I want to go to. Create nCloth. So now we hit play. Bloop, and there it is. A nice squishy ball. Okay, so what we have is a few options that we can play with. I'm going to pull my attribute editor out. And let's first talk about, before we get into the options, what we all get when we start creating this stuff. So we have a plane and a sphere. Those are the two objects we created. The first time I make anything an N object, an N rigid, an N passive collider, or an nCloth object, I get a nucleus. Okay, and the nucleus is what's controlling everything in our scene. That's the guy that's making all of this happen. And if I go into the nucleus, and let's say I were to delete it, okay, let's for fun delete it, hit play, and you'll see that nothing happens. The nucleus makes everything happen. It makes the magic happen. So if that's gone, the magic's gone. Okay, rewind, play. There we are, still working. Okay, with nCloth, always rewind. All right, don't try to click and drag in here because it'll start freaking out. Okay, always use the rewind button and then the play button here, and then rewind again. All right. On the nucleus, I can actually disable it by clicking Enable Off, and then hit play, and now it still won't calculate it. Now, why would we want to do that? We'd want to do that because sometimes we might have one nucleus thing over here that we're working on, and some other nucleus thing over here that we don't need to worry about. Okay, they don't interact. Here's a good example of that. Is if I go, let's say I created a cube. Create a plane. Okay, so the cube, I'm going to make a passive collider. The plane, I'm going to make an nCloth object. Okay, now I'm going to hit play. And you see how this kind of drapes over this thing. Now these things over here really don't interact with these things here. So there's no reason that we need to even have them on the same solver. Okay. Now what I mean by that is even though these aren't colliding with each other, Maya's still trying to figure out if these objects are needed, if this object is colliding with this, or if this object is colliding with that. In this simple example, we don't really see a performance hit, but guaranteed, imagine that we had 50 bowling alleys, and 50 bowling alleys had balls rolling down there and hitting the pins. We don't need each ball to collide with each pin of each alley and each whatever, okay? So we can basically set up different nucleuses for each thing. So if I grab these two guys and I go to my nSolver menu and I go to Assign Solver, New Solver, what's going to happen is I get a new solver. And so now I rewind and play. we get basically the same animation, but I can enable this one or disable it, and then I can still see the animation of the other one. Okay, so if I'm focused on bowling alley number 12, I can just focus on bowling alley number 12 without Maya having to calculate all the other lanes doing their stuff too. So it's a good habit to get into, to just kind of maximize your performance by setting up things like this where you don't really need to have extra nucleuses. Just kind of set them up and set them aside. Alright, so I'm going to delete those. So I'm back to my planes, my nucleus for the first stuff, and then my nRigid, which is this guy, and then my nCloth, which is that guy. You'll notice that when I select nCloth or nRigid, it doesn't actually select either of these objects. They're just kind of connected to those objects. Okay, so if I click on my plane, here is that nRigid shape. If I click on my sphere, here is that nCloth shape. Alright, so we have under the nCloth shape, oops, sorry, I'll just click on the plane and make it easier to understand what we're doing. The nRigid shape, we have some options here. One of them is thickness. If I pull this up to like 1, and we go to a side-ish view and I hit play, you can see where the ball is contacting this is basically 1 unit off the ground. If I take this down to 0, which, you know, why would you want to have a thickness, right? Well, sometimes if you don't have some sort of thickness, the object can actually penetrate through here, okay? And you'll see it, and you'll just have to play with this number until you get desired results. Alright, I don't really see anything in this case because it's such a simple scene that we really even need to worry about this too much. But be aware that this is something that you probably will need to play with at some point. There's also this, right above this is a collision layer. I'm going to create another object. Okay, here it is. Create nCloth. I hit play. So like I said, we hit play. And you can see how they're basically colliding with each other. And this one's sitting on top of that one. Okay, so in this case they're interacting, and it makes sense that these two objects are interacting. But what if they're not interacting? What if one's on one side, one's on the other side? Okay, that's where you can use collision layers. And if I put one on a collision layer of, let's say, 1, I grab the other guy and set him on a collision layer of 2, and I hit play, not a huge difference. Okay, if I grab the ground and set him on a collision layer of 3, you can see how the balls basically travel right through it. Okay, the collision layer works like setting up separate nucleuses. Alright, so I could have this object on one nucleus, let's say, this object on another nucleus. But what happens if I want both of them to collide with this ground plane? Well, that's where I could use collision layers and say, okay, everything on this, this 2 collision layer is going to collide together, and everything on this 1 collision layer is going to collide together. And then if anything's on 0, that collides with everything. Okay, so if I hit play, these both collide with the ground. But if I scoot this guy over here, I believe one of these will collide with the other one, but not the other way around. It'll actually give us some weird results. You can see how slow it's going now. But it just doesn't like the fact that one is colliding and the other one's not. You can see it's poking through here and so on. So you wouldn't use this for a collision like that. You would mainly use it for, I have different animations in here and I want these 2 different things to interact differently. Oops. Okay, so I'll put them both back to 0 just so we have them back to 0. Alright. So, both of these have this. All dynamic objects have it. They all have a thickness. You see that this plane has a thickness. This object has a collision thickness. Okay? And there's also a self-collide with scale. This one doesn't have that, but this one does. Okay? This object is actually colliding, and as it falls, you can see like this, how thick is this right here that's colliding with itself? Okay, and we could even turn off self-collide and turn off collide if we really wanted to, if we had something specific we were doing with this. So I could take the self-collide width up to, let's say, 5, and it'd probably do something funky. Okay, first of all, it's going slow, really, really slow. And we'll see what happens when it hits the ground. kind of the same thing, but it doesn't really impact or doesn't really flatten out as much as it did before, okay? Just because I took that self-collide width up. Now, how do we know how big the self-collide width is? That's where this guy comes in. Right now it says solver display off. I can choose collision thickness, okay, and this yellow is the collision thickness. I can choose self-collision thickness, that's the self-collision thickness. I can choose stretch links, which is something else. I can choose bend links, weighting, and that's it. Okay. So some of these things will come in handy the more you start to play with it, because you're like, well, I need to see how how thick is this thing colliding, and they say, oh, okay, well, I have plenty of room still where I could kind of fudge things around. All right. So we'll get more into that. Some of the fun ones. Here's bounce. Here's friction. Here's stickiness. Some of the same properties we dealt with on the other one. So let's just put this back to 1. There we go. And let's go to the ground, which also has the solver displays, but it just has collision thickness on here. And you'll see that if I take the thickness up, it's going to take that collision thickness up as well. Okay, but it has bounciness. So if I take the bounciness up to 1, you can see not much really happens. There's a little bit of bounce there. Just like before, sometimes we have to tweak things on both levels in order to get the results we want. Okay. And it could just be that it just has not really, whoa. One of the fun things of dynamics is you just start punching in numbers and then things go bananas. And so now we're back. Let me not put that up to 5. Once we change some of our other parameters, this bounciness value will be a little bit easier to see. Okay. We can also take this, let's say I rotate it on an angle, hit play. Okay, you can see it's basically sliding straight down there. So let's take the friction up. Okay, and you can see it doesn't really slide. It kind of folds over a little bit and moves a little bit. Okay, you can see how this one is basically just moving and rolling, moving and rolling. There's some friction there, kind of holding it in place, but it's not holding it fully down. That's where stickiness comes in. If I crank stickiness up, you can see it's basically stuck to this thing. So even if this thing were to animate upside down, if we go to our nSolver, you'll see there's an interactive playback, which is kind of cool. So we hit this interactive playback, and we can actually go through and animate and see what this is going to look like. So you see, with this thing tilted like this, they're still not falling because stickiness is up. I take stickiness off, oops, and there they go. Okay, just rewind it and reset that back to there. Okay, so there's a big difference between stickiness and friction. You can see friction is not going to keep it stuck to the object. Stickiness is going to keep it stuck. It's typically good to have some sort of friction on there. Without any friction, it'll look more like ice, where it just kind of like slides right off. With some friction, you get a nice little feel to it. I even liked it when it was at 0.2. Okay, you can see it's got some stickiness there. It's not fully moving super quick. Alright, and then these guys also have it, so if something's colliding with this, we can change their friction or their stickiness to that object. For instance, if someone's touching bubble gum, we may want that to be sticky and attached to the finger, stuff like that. Here's where the major areas of what this thing is going to look like. There's collision properties maps. We'll get into that in a minute. But there's dynamic properties for these objects. Okay, this does not have that. Okay, because these are nCloth, they get the dynamic properties, and this is going to control some of these attributes of what this is going to look like when it collides with things or when it interacts. So here, where it's flattening out, I can say I don't want that to flatten out. I'm going to take this compression resistance up to 200. Okay, that didn't work. Compression resistance, that should have worked. And just crank all 3 of those up. There we go. Okay, so now you can see there's a little bit of bounce to it. Not sure why compression resistance didn't really want to work for me there. Part of it has to do with what Maya is actually doing in the math of this thing. Compression is obviously like the compression of the object to us, but in Maya's terms, it's basically trying to figure out how these edges and vertices are moving, that it figures that out. So stretch resistance is basically the stretchiness of these things. So if I were to go here like this and hit play, oops, rewind it, scoot it over, trying to get it right on the edge. There we go, something like that. So I'm going to take my compression resistance off, my bend resistance off, and stretch resistance off. You can see this thing is just going to droop and sag way down here because stretch resistance is off, and bend resistance, and compression resistance. So it's just going to be kind of droopy, kind of like a liquidy type material. Now you can do stuff like this, and if I hit 3, it'll kind of smooth it out, and we'll get this somewhat liquidy, tarry, putty look to it. Okay, so you can do cool stuff like that. Now basically what I do is I'll start off, you can look at these, you can read the definitions of each one of these things, and each one of these is going to kind of help create the look that you're after. Okay, but I'll typically go up here first to presets, and there's a bunch of presets that give you an idea of what you want to do. So if I was trying to create concrete, I go to the concrete preset and say replace. It basically punches in different values, and then I hit play, and you see that this hit, and now it's staying right here. Let me scoot it over a little bit. Maybe we can get it to roll down the hill after it kind of dents in. Maybe not. Let's put this on a little bit bigger angle. This is dynamics. It's just playing with those values until you get the desired results. And sometimes it's actually just fudging it to get the desired results. Like I could have had a fake object push it over. Alright, so here's concrete. You see how it just smacks it and flattens it out. Okay, now if I switch this to beach ball and rewind it, you see how it kind of inflated a little bit, and it's kind of bouncy and spinning. Sometimes things spin in here. I go back to here, there's one that's called putty. You can see the reaction we get with that one. And it's kind of rolling down. You can use any shape for this. I'm using a sphere. Obviously, I could even use like a full-blown human character, but it's going to take a little bit longer. I can go with lava. Always rewind, always play. And those lava, that kind of looks like putty, but some of these are just, you know, you have to play with them. Water balloon. So their presets are actually pretty decent to start with. Okay. And one of the things I would do before even really getting into this assignment is to go through all the presets and just see what they do. Okay. Water volume. Let's just see what that one does. Alright, and then just for fun, because I want to see what it's going to look like, I'm going to throw in a cylinder here. And I'm going to make that a passive collider. I just want to see what's going to happen when that thing hits and droops around it. It looks kind of cool. Alright, so there's lots of cool things we can do with stuff like that. Alright, play with the presets. The other areas, I'm going to just go back to, there's no like default one, so I think I'm just going to go back to like a t-shirt. Okay, so there's t-shirt. Wonderful. Alright, so some of the other things that are going to help this thing kind of interact correctly. Mass, just like we had in the other one. Lift, which is the ability to have it kind of lift up a little bit off the ground, kind of like float, as opposed to just kind of falling straight. There's drag, tangential drag, which is the same as the bullet ones. Drag is just going to slow it down some. If we don't have drag or tangenting drag, or even damping, damping is another one, okay, and we just hit play, this thing is just going to interact and just keep interacting forever. It's never really going to slow down or stop because it's just going to keep moving. It's kind of like a friction type thing. Obviously this is stopping because it's hitting that, but we'll probably, yep, it's doing what I thought it would do, which is kind of creep around the corner. Yeah, it did stop, whatever. Okay, so we always want to have some sort of drag in here and some sort of damping. Okay. Even if it's little, you can play with that. And that'll just create more of like the realistic look that, you know, objects have, because they don't just go crazy. There's some other things down here. Force field generation. I've never really played with force field or wind generation. The pressure one is kind of a cool thing to play with. So I'm going to go here. Let's just reset some of this stuff. Just delete that. Get rid of that. I'm going to delete this guy and just use the other one. Alright, so I'm hitting play. Oops. He's on collision layer 0. He's there. There we go. Oh, it's a glitch. Alright, so I'm going to hit play. And let's pretend that for this guy here, I want him to start like that. Okay? I'm going to give him a little bit more distance, a little bit more self-collision, just so he doesn't do what he's doing there. And a little bit more compression resistance. Alright, so we have this thing here. What if I wanted to get it to stay like this at the beginning? When I rewind it, it's going to reset back to the top. But when I hit play, it goes back there. Okay, so I want it to stay like this at the beginning. So I'm going to go to my N solver, stay initial state, set from current. Alright, so what we do, we set the initial state, so now when we rewind it, you see here he is stuck at the beginning, just like that. We hit play, and he's just going to continue onward with what he was. I'm going to set just another initial state, just because sometimes there's a little bit more resting that happens. There's always a little bit of resting, whatever. Alright, so here's where, way down in the bottom here, this pressure is kind of cool. I'm going to turn on, I'll just do it here. I'll just add a little bit of pressure, like 0.1, and hit play. Nothing happens. 0.2. You see it got a little bigger. 0.3. 0.4. 0.5. Keep going. 0.8. There we go. And you can see that we basically blew this thing back up to its original shape. So if I rewind it now and just hit play, it's just going to pop up and be kind of bouncy. But I can keyframe this, which is a cool thing. So I can say at frame 1 right here, I'm at 0. And then at frame 150, let's say I'm at 0.9. So now I rewind, I hit play, and then we gradually kind of fill the air into this thing. So we're gradually filling the air into this until it's basically back up to where it was. And I can even crank it up a little bit more if I need to. I can just right click on this, go to this top output, and then just change that to a value of 1. So now I rewind and play. And you'll see it blows back up. Okay? And then of course, you know, what's the fun of blowing something up if you can't deflate it again? So let's go up to like 240. We'll put it back to 0. So we'll inflate the thing, it'll start moving, and then we'll deflate it. It's cute and it's sad. The poor little balloon. Alright. We could also do pressure damping, which is kind of like you know, the damping that we would do on a regular object. Okay, so it'll just give us a little bit softer feel to it as opposed to just like hard pressure just being put into the balloon. There we go. So that's the manual one. There's also volume tracking mode. Okay, where I just give it a start pressure and then I give it like a pump rate. So I'm basically like pumping air into this thing. And then it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's why it spins around, because it just goes crazy. So typically the pump rate is really low, like 0.001. And then without setting any keyframes, it's automatically filling up with air. Obviously my 0.001 is probably 0.00 too low. There it goes. So now we're filling up. And you can see the look that we're getting with something like this. Okay, let's go maybe 0.008. A little bit quicker fill up, or maybe 0.01. A quicker fill up. Let's take some of the air out of it with this air tightness. Okay, basically it's pumping in air, and then some of the air is just leaving it. So what we can do is just say, okay, well, now that some of the air is leaving it, now we have to increase how much air is going in per time. It's kind of like filling up a flat tire. You know, if there's a hole in it, you have to put in more air because it just keeps shooting back out. So that stuff is pretty cool. There's some quality settings in here. Don't really play with those too much. I'm going to jump back up to the top where we have these collision property maps. And these are where you can really do a lot of advanced stuff. Okay, for a regular ball like this guy here, he's pretty much the thickness is going to be the same, the bounce is going to be the same, friction or stickiness or any of these properties. And there's also dynamic property maps right here that we can play with as well, controlling the rigidity and the stretch and all these different kinds of things. There's also a wrinkle map that you can put in there. And what this stuff allows you to do is basically customize how this is going to look. So if I had like a t-shirt, okay, a plain t-shirt like this is pretty much going to have overall dynamic properties. There'll be a couple areas that it doesn't. But what about something like a dress shirt? On a dress shirt, the collar is about a bit stiffer than the arms are, and the cuffs are a bit stiffer as well. So the dress shirt or shrit has different properties, and you can paint those on there. Okay, so I can have certain areas like over here I want this to be stiffer than over there. I want this area to be sticky because someone's setting gum, I guess, and then this area. Okay, or the mass is different here than there, and that's where where the Hollywood people make their money, because they have I'm gonna say they have time to do this, but they have to do this kind of stuff in order for their stuff to look real. Okay, so sometimes you just have to go into these settings and set it up as best you can. All right, so now this is the basic properties of this. With the nucleus, there are some other properties that we can play with as well. One of them is gravity. Okay, when we hit play, we automatically get gravity. Oops, let me take the volume tracking, take it back to manual, break the connection, there we go. And then I can actually just go back to my end solver initial state and then just say clear. There we go. So now we're back to where we were before. Alright, so what I can do is take this thing, go back to my nucleus, which I can get from any object property, and I can take my gravity off. Take gravity off, hit play, doesn't move. Okay, it's still dynamic, it's just not moving. So 9.8, just like before, is our default gravity setting. -1 in the Y direction is the way it's moving, so it's moving downward. If this was an undersea thing, oops, I can make this 1 and hit play, and you'll see that it floats upwards. Okay, it's not undersea though. There's also air density, wind speed, and wind noise. Now when I hit play, I'm going to stop it right before we get to the bottom, and you'll see that there's some sort of deformation. Alright, so you see we have a little bit of stuff there. That's where the air density is coming in. Basically, like the thickness of the air is kind of holding that back. If I take air density away, unless I'm a liar, you see that it's perfectly round. So if the air does thicker, we'd obviously get more kind of caving in before it hits the ground, which looks kind of funny. So 1 is typically a good value. There's also wind speed. You know, this ball is basically falling straight down. We can add a little bit of wind speed to this. Now the direction is picked up right here, wind direction 1, and that's the X direction. So if I look in the X direction, which is that away, the way this red arrow is pointing. You see how we're kind of moving in that direction, even though it's subtle. Let's crank this up. There we go. And it's blowing away. Okay, we also have wind noise, which is just kind of like making it random. Okay, instead of like one solid movement, it's just breaking it up. So those are things you can play with. There's also this use plane, and the use plane is if you wanted to not have a ground here, but you still wanted to have something. I've never really found a use for this except for just kind of screwing around with stuff. So I never really use that. Substeps. This is, you may need to increase this if you're not getting the desired results. You may have to say I want, and I typically just double each of these, so I'll go 6 and 8. And then hit play. And what that's going to do is just take its time and do more calculations on the solver to figure out if the stuff is working correctly. Okay? Because sometimes you'll get like funky things happening where the nCloth object just kind of pops through something. Alright, so now let's delete this and actually create something using our nCloth tools. So I'm going to go to the visor, Window General Editor Visor. That's not it. And I'm going to just drop in the running man. So I'm just middle drag the running dude from the mocap examples into my scene. He's huge, right there. And these are real scale, okay? So this is how big, I believe, how big he should be. Alright, so I'm going to create a cape for him and have this cape behind him. So create polygon plane. I'm going to snap it over here, make it bigger. Pull this back there. I'm going to step away for a minute and just kind of remodel this a little bit. I'll be back. Alright, so it's not fantastic, but that's where we're going to go with this. Alright, so there is a cape. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this into an nCloth. There we go. So that's an nCloth. So now I want to attach it to him. If I hit play, he runs away. Alright. So if you might be thinking, just click him and make him passive. Let's do that. Hit play. It still stays there. Alright. We have to constrain. We have to basically stick this object to him. So I'm going to go to vertices. And I'm just going to marquee these vertices along this hard collar area. Now, if this was like a hard collar, I can kind of fake this by utilizing these points. There we go. So I'm grabbing those, and I'm going to go up to end constraint, which is right here. There's a bunch of constraints in here. Play with them. Look at the documentation for all these. It's obviously way too much to go into all at once. And I'm going to create an end constraint transform. Okay. This creates a locator. It's hard to see, but it's right there. There's a locator. And these points are now stuck to that locator. So if I hit play, you can see how those points are basically staying right there. Okay. So what I can do is take that locator, go to wireframe mode, shift click this joint by the neck, and hit P to parent it. So I grab the locator, shift click this, P to parent. So now, as I hit play, you can see he's moving along. And his cape is going crazy, of course. Alright, but now it's moving with him. That's step one. Okay, so I don't want to start with the cape already like in the air like this. I want it to start down. So I need to basically allow some frames where this can just kind of settle. Let's see if they have like this relaxed initial state. I don't know what this thing is going to do. I think if I hit this a few times. Let's do 150 frames. Okay, and it just says this is just relaxing this so we can see what it's going to be looking like at the beginning. So without moving anything else in the scene, it's just kind of relaxing this. So, and you see it's also colliding with him. Alright, so that's pretty good. So we can go with something like that. So now if we hit rewind, you see it's still stuck there. So now we hit play, and there it goes. So now we need to come back and adjust some of these properties so that it doesn't go as crazy as it's going. All right. So let's look at the thickness. I'm going to say collision thickness is here. I just want to make sure it's not intersecting him too badly. It looks like it's good. Self-collision thickness is probably good there too. All right, so those two are good. I'll probably just lower this. Well, it is big. Okay, that's why it's so big. All right, because he's big, so that's going to be big, so that's fine. All right, so that's good. Let's go down to damping, and we'll throw the damping up a little bit. Alright. And you see it's still kind of folding in on itself, so maybe we'll take, we're going to go to the nucleus, and sometimes under these time and scale attributes, scale attributes is the one I wanted, we can kind of set this thing up to say, okay, we have a space scale of 10. Okay, and basically this is basically scaling up the entire nCloth solver, maybe 100. And sometimes simply doing that will help us get better results. I'll even go the other way just to see, and you can see this is like way too much movement. 100, maybe even 1,000 might be too crazy. There we go. So we're getting closer to it, alright? So I'm going to leave it at 100. I'm going to come back here, maybe give this a little bit more mass and a little bit more drag. There we go. And part of it is he's just stopping, you know, so that's going to look kind of funny. So I wouldn't want to use this for the entire animation, but I could use it for a little sequence where he's running and I have this cape like flapping in the background. Okay, so I can add a little bit more drag to this if I need to, add a little bit more mass to this. Go. The drag might have been a little bit too much. And maybe the mass was a little bit too much also. Well, let's go back to 1 on the mass. I think I just find that happy medium. I want it to be behind him. There we go. I think that's, without the collisions, that's looking good. Okay, so I'm going to go back up to my self-collision scale and maybe put that up to 5. Okay, so they were better at self-colliding. It's not self-colliding anymore. And that looks like a pretty decent animation. Okay, so I'm going to pretend that this animation is spot on, perfect, awesome, super duper. So I'm going to do what's called a cache. Okay, I'm going to go up to nCache and say create nCache. And it wants to know how long I want this nCache to be. So I'm going to hit play. And at some point, the runner stops. So I'm just going to try to figure out where the runner stops at. Alright, so it's 67. Alright, so I'm going to say create an nCache. And I'm going to call this cape. That's fine, MTX. I'm going to do 1 file per frame, start and end, frames 1 through 67. So create. And what it's going to do now is it's basically writing out that information. Okay, so right now I have 67 frames of this. So if I click back and forth now, I have that animation saved. So if I were to go in here and just go something crazy and just take the bounce and the friction up and the stickiness up and take all my parameters and make them just crazy, and I rewind it and hit play, I'm going to get the same animation. Okay, because this is basically like locked in. This is not going to change at all. The only way I can get it to change is to go up here and say delete the cache or disable it. And now I hit play. I get that. Which ironically doesn't look like it's too bad of an animation. Even with all these things kind of cranked up. I don't like the dynamic of it though, so I'm just going to undo all those settings. There we go. I'm going to reattach. Can I attach it? Let me see. Attach existing cache file. Yes, I can. There it is. Okay, so I just attached the cape cache file. So now I have that animation locked in still. So even though it deletes it, it just kind of disconnects it. Alright, so now we have that. So now I can do something else. So I'm going to go and I'll create a ground plane just because it's bothering me there's no ground. I'll create a couple cylinders here. Let me see how far this guy runs. Right through there. So I'm going to have him run to about there. There we go. Okay. So here's the 2 cylinders he's going to run through. And I'm going to just go create a banner. Plane. And rotate. Oh, terrible. Oops. Rotate this 90. Now in order for me to get a good simulation on a lot of these objects, I have to make sure that these objects are have enough divisions. Okay, if they don't have enough divisions, it's just not going to work. Okay, so like this, if I want a lot of flaggy deformation, I can't have it like that. I need lots of divisions, and the more divisions I have, the more deformation I can get in this, which I'll show in a second. So I'm just going to take this to 15 in one direction, and there we go, and then kind of square in the other direction. For now, I just want to make these maybe that big. Okay, I like them to be square, and you get better results if things are square. There we go. So we go 50, I guess, and 5. All right. So we're going to take this. I'm going to just make sure that he. Oops, it's too high. There we go. Okay. All right. So he's going to collide through that. So now we're going to take this and make it an nCloth. We rewind. We hit play. You see that it's going to fall. Or it should have fallen. It was probably just falling super duper slow. Yes, it's falling super duper slow. So I'm going to grab the vertices here on the end, here and here, and do another transform constraint. Okay, I'm not parenting it to this anything because it's not moving. So I'll make sure that that stays there. So now when he runs through it, you can see how he's like stretching this out. Okay, we don't want it to stretch out. I actually want it to break, but it looks like it's like entangling him. So one of the cool things we can do with nCloth is I can just grab a grouping of vertices. I'll even make this really crazy. Oops. Like that. And I can go under the end constraints and I can create a terrible surface. There it is, terrible surface. Create. It creates this. Now this is kind of buggy, so you have to be careful. Sometimes your constraints that you've already created will go away. So now if I hit play, I'm going to hide the constraints. I'm going to open the outliner. Find my dynamic constraint. I'll call this one terrible banner. And this is transform banner. I'm just going to hide both of these with Control H. It doesn't affect it. It just makes it easier to see. So now he runs through, and he tears it up. So it looks pretty cool. All right. So now again, we go to edit the properties of this. This thing here should be a bit heavier so that we get some more droop. So let's make this 30. All right. Let's make it 100. It's only getting a drop on it. All right. Let's go to our stretch resistance and compression resistance. Let's turn those off. go through presets. Let me just set this to something that I know would stretch out, something like lava. Alright, and sometimes this is the case where we just say grab this stuff and delete it, and let's remake that piece. Create a new plane. It is possible too that I just had too many divisions. Too many divisions sometimes can just cause too many things to be holding it together. I think that's about where it was. Yep, that's good. Alright, so let's make more divisions here. There we go. Alright, so let's start there, I guess. Alright, so we got this. Let's delete the history just to make sure. Let's grab the vertices on the edges. Oops, I'm going to make it nCloth first. There we go. So before we even do the other stuff, I'm just going to put the transform constraint on, hit play, and I want to get some of the droop on this. I'm going to go back to the nucleus and just take this space scale back to 1. There we go. So now I'm getting some droop on there. Okay, the space scale being up to 100 was causing it just to not interact, because on this thing we wanted it at 100. On this one I don't need it at 100. So now I can go back to my mass, take my mass up a little bit. A little bit more droop. Let's take our stretch resistance down and our compression resistance down. There we go. Let's take it down even more. A little bit too low. Alright, let's go 0.5, 0.5. Still a little too low. Let it try 1. Okay. Now before he even hits it, or he's kind of hitting it there, that's fine. I'm going to do an initial state on this. Set from current. Rewind. Hit play again. Whoa. Oops. And let's just do that little trick to just relax this. There we go. So that should be good there. Alright. So now we can go into this, into the vertices, grab some of the vertices here. And you don't have to do it uniformly. I can go kind of, I'm just holding shift and just marking sections and overlapping them. And that's giving me this random pattern of vertices. And then go into my end constraint. Go into my terrible surface. There it is. And then rewind it. I don't know why it popped up like that. Let me reset this initial state. There we go. Alright, so now we hit play. And there he is busting through, sort of. Okay, let's go back. Let's grab this stuff. And I can go over here to my glue strength, which is right there. And I'm going to lower this to 0.5. My glue strength scale. Alright, maybe that's not the right method I want to take that. Maybe we'll go back into our stretch resistance and put this up to 2. And it's also possible that I didn't really create a path for this to actually break all the way. So just for fun, let me just grab a couple more of these that I know will break. Terrible surface. Good, at least I have some sort of path. I'll hit play. I'll reset my initial state. Rewind it again. Hit play. And sort of, kind of. Alright, let's go in here. Let's take the mass up. Let's take our drag, our damping up. Alright, I think I want to just kind of move. I'm going to move him over a little bit. Let's see if we can do that. No, we can't because we got the other stuff. Alright, I'm just going to add another one of these things in. You just keep playing with these things, and that's why you got a dynamic. We get some bit of easiness to it, but then there's this other hard stuff of just kind of troubleshooting and playing. Oops. Now I have to be careful because if you look at this, it already tore. I want to make sure I don't let it tear until I'm ready for it to tear. Okay, so right there, I'll set an initial state. Current. Rewind it. Hit play again. Oops, it already tore. We'll just see what happens. Okay, that's better results that we wanted. Him actually just breaking through this thing. Okay, obviously in a perfect world I'd have this, you know, the guy actually moving a lot more. Alright, so I'm going to go back to my last dynamic constraint, and I'm going to take my glue strength up to 0.2. Oops, it's still not holding together very good. And because I have a couple in here, I'm going to have to play with a couple of these glue strengths. There we go. There we go. So now he's ripping through that. So again, I can take this cloth and we can do a cache on it. So I'll create a new cache, and this is going to be 1 through, let's say, 100. And this will be banner, create. There we go. So now we have both of these things cached, and we're ready to go with the rest of it. Okay. Now because I did that one all the way to 100, I'm going to do this other cape to 100 also. So I'm going to say create new cache on here, call it cape, create. Oops. Let me delete the cache first on that one, and then create it. Replace existing. Alright, so there we go. So now I have 100 frames of it doing that. Good. Alright, and then of course, because he won, let's have a flag flapping in the background. I'm just going to borrow this cylinder. And then I'm going to create plane. I'll make these things square. Like I said before, you get better results of the square. And because we have a flag, we want to make it nice and neat. Alright, so this is going to be nCloth. This is going to be passive. We're going to constrain it here and here. So we'll go to our constraint, do a transform, play. Doesn't really look perfect. So I'm going to go to my nucleus, and I'm going to turn some wind on in the Z direction. negative Z actually. Oops. And I'll add a little noise. Let me crank up the speed some. There we go. Okay, so now that we have this, let me set my initial state for it. There we go. Now just so you can see, because this is just a plane, I could throw a Mia on this, click on the color, click on a file, and just copy this image, paste it in there. There's my USA flag. Oops, it's backwards. So I'm just going to go to my place 2D texture and do a mirror. Oops, not a mirror. Do a rotate. That's not right. 90. And then do an mirror on this and just translate it the other way. There we go. A little bit of playing around to get it in the right spot. But now, very patriotic. We have the American flag flying in the background while our guy wins this race. And again, we'll take that and we'll go to cache. We'll make a cache called flag and create. Alright, so now I'm only going to 100, so let's set this to 100. Let's rewind and let's play. There we go. So now nothing in this scene, even though we've used dynamics, nothing right now is dynamic. Everything has been basically written out to disk. If I go into my desktop, my D drive, Sarcona, 2550, work, I'm going super fast, it's fine. Data, not data, render data. There is cache, there we go. There's an nCache, untitled, and here is the banner, and here is every single one of the frames for the banner written out to disk as to where each one of those things are. There's the cape and all the information there, there's the flag and all the information there. Okay. So the cool thing about this is that if I were to take this to another station and render the last 50 frames of this, and I went on another station and rendered the first 50 frames, it's going to be exact. Either way, it's going to be exact. If I didn't cache out these three things, because it's dynamic and there's some sort of randomness to it, I could end up with the results being different on each one. So I could render out 1 through 50, and that looks good on one station. I render out 50 through 100, that looks good on another station, but I put them together and they don't look good because they're doing two different things. Okay? So there's lots of things you can do with nCloth. Your assignment for this one is you're going to be creating 3 nCloth elements in the same scene and having them interact. Okay? Or not necessarily interacting with each other, but just doing different things. I'll show some examples in class of things we're doing, but like as always, we can use YouTube. And number one thing I mentioned before, go to Joel Stutz, S-T-U-T-Z. His website has so much information about using nCloth and all the different properties that it does. It gives you the definition, gives you little videos of what they do. And come on. Maya has a user's guide for nCloth where it has a couple little projects here of things that you can do also. Here's a zipper where you actually create the zipper and it unzips these two pieces of cloth. There's confetti, there's a bag of marbles, there's a tree, there's balloons. The tree is really cool because you create this tree and the leaves blow off of the tree. There's a shirt, like that. There's a soda can. I don't remember what the soda can does. I think it just gets dented. Yeah, okay. There's some stuff online about on YouTube doing different nCloth things. This is obviously just his video showing nCloth. This is basically like what we did with Bullet, except there's a little bit of deformation in each one of these things. And if you can read, I think that's Russian or Czech. I don't know what language that would be. Czech. Alright, here's a boat with some sails on it. That's pretty cool. This is nCloth spheres with N particles on the inside, which eventually we'll get to N particles and what those are. Okay, creating a glass shadow effect using nCloth. Some of these don't work terribly good. A student did try one of these like this last time, and it just really didn't turn out to be like the world's greatest example of nCloth, and it took a terribly long time for it to calculate and ... Okay, so look around, see if you can find something that inspires you to do something like that. You could definitely use these guys and give them clothing, like you could put a skirt on. Go back to the visor. Mocap examples. There's a dancing guy here. There's a dancing guy there. There's a basketball dunker. There's someone who just walks. You could put clothing on them. I've had someone they created a robe and had the person walk down the street basically with this robe on. It took them 3 days of working just to get the robe to look and react correctly. Okay, but it's there. And just another quick example. Here's some nCloth tests. So definitely look at some of these things because it's not going to turn out perfect the very first time. And you may have to watch videos of what it looks like when clothing moves, but do that. You have to kind of take a little bit of ownership in that. Here it is, my nCloth tutorials working with nCaches if you want more information. Okay, obviously a lot of this is just going to come with time and playing. This is one aspect of the dynamics area inside Maya, so we're spending some time on it, and you'll get a couple different things we can do with it, but you really get some cool stuff that you can create with it to do this. And one of the things you might see in some of these demo reels is people like to take a plane like so. Yeah, we'll just add a bunch of divisions like that, and then we'll make this nCloth. Make sure I'm not skipping them now. Okay. I don't know why that's kind of just hanging out there. Get rid of my wind. There we go. But essentially what people do is they'll have this thing kind of collide with a car and then have the wind blow it off. I've seen that done numerous times. I'm just interested now to see what's going to happen when this guy runs through it. There it goes. And there's other pieces of nCloth that hit it and are falling out. Oops. I can see it now. It's just freaking out because there's just so much movement in those bottom pieces of things. Okay, and even if I wanted to keep something like, okay, I said that's cool, I love this shape, I want to keep it, I can just duplicate that shape. And even though it was nCloth, now I just have a piece of geometry that I could actually use as just a single piece of geometry. I'm creating a bedroom scene and I want to use a thrown blanket in the corner. There's a thrown blanket in the corner very, very quickly instead of me trying to mesh this. Or if I'm doing a fruit bowl scene and I want to kind of mess up this blanket, a little bit more, I can do that and put fruit somewhere on here. Okay. So there's numerous applications for this. I can't go through everything. I could probably teach a whole class on just nCloth, but obviously people get bored after having cloth fall for 16 weeks straight. Alright, so your assignment, like I said, create 3 different things and do a good example. This is only 100 frames. You probably want to have it a little bit longer than 100 frames just because there's so much stuff going on. But think of something else you could do. Obviously, the more complex you do, the longer it's going to take, but the better the results could be, and the better you want to create something like that for a portfolio. Okay? So if I was doing something like this for a cape, I'd maybe want to make this a longer cape like Batman's cape or Superman's cape. Okay? Alright, so that's it.